Hello and welcome back to The Path, the podcast from Lifestyle RX. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by Brendan today. How's it going?
It's going great, Dan. How are you?
Not too bad. Had a bit of a break last week for some summer vacation, so we're happy to be back now. Today we have a bit of a different kind of episode. So maybe, Brendan, you want to introduce what's different about this one?
Yeah, so what we've got ahead of you is a video on subtypes of type 2 diabetes. So as a lot of people realize when they get into the group is everybody's different. Everybody's got a different physiology, and some people are more similar to others, and some people are more different than others. Turns out that there are five natural clusters that form around type 2 diabetes, and we start to think of these as subtypes. And it's an emerging area that was first published in like 2018 or 2019 that these subtypes existed. A researcher in Sweden did this, and then subsequently there's at least 11 different groups around the world with all different populations that have reproduced that these subtypes exist. We've gone through our own data, and we actually see that the subtypes really are present. And it opens up kind of the fascinating approach. Is there a little bit different approach for each person, depending on what subtype? And so we're always trying to make this program as efficacious as possible. We're always trying to find ways that if something's more important because of the underlying subtype that you're coming from, then we should emphasize that more. So why don't we jump into the video first? Because I think it gives a good structured overview of the subtypes, and then we can come back and answer a few questions.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Okay, we'll roll the video now.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brendan Byrne, Medical Director of Lifestyle RX, and I'm here to talk to you about an emerging concept of type 2 diabetes subtypes and the potential for a personalized medicine approach to diabetes. Let's go back to the definition of diabetes. Diabetes is a condition where your body does not regulate blood sugars properly. And this happens because your body does not make enough insulin. Remember, insulin is the hormone your body uses to store and use glucose. If we go a bit deeper, we can see that there might be two reasons why your body does not make enough insulin. One, beta cells in the pancreas cannot make or release enough insulin, or two, insulin doesn't work properly. It's this combination of these two factors, pancreatic beta cell capacity versus insulin resistance, that determines all forms of diabetes. In fact, we can think of blood sugar control as the balance between the pancreas's ability to produce insulin and the resistance that insulin faces in the body. In type 1 diabetes, we see that there's minimal to no insulin release that leads to abnormal blood sugars. Insulin resistance only makes things worse. In type 2 diabetes, as insulin resistance develops, pancreatic beta cells compensate by releasing more insulin, and blood sugars can remain normal. How long this goes on for depends on the pancreas. At some point, insulin resistance overwhelms pancreatic beta cell capacity and blood glucose levels rise. If pancreatic beta cell capacity decreases, even if it's still normal, high insulin resistance can lead to abnormal blood sugars. In most forms of type 2 diabetes, the pancreas can no longer release enough insulin to overcome the insulin resistance, resulting in elevated blood sugars. Medications can compensate and help restore some of the balance to improve a hemoglobin A1C, but they don't necessarily affect the underlying process. But not all type 2 diabetes is the same. In fact, recent studies confirm at least 5 different subtypes. Let's take a look at them. In subtype 1, representing about 6% of type 2 diabetes, we see an autoimmune process that is similar to type 1 diabetes. This is called autoimmune insulin deficiency, or LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood. Insulin production is severely decreased. 90% of patients are GAD antibody positive. These patients have difficulty tolerating carbohydrates without insulin, and they often have normal BMI to minimal or no insulin resistance. The second subtype is severe insulin deficiency, and it accounts for 18% of type 2 diabetes cases. It's very similar to subtype 1, except there are no detectable antibodies. Clinically, these patients present similarly in that their ability to tolerate carbohydrates is very limited, and they often have normal BMI with minimal to no insulin resistance. The third subtype is quite different. This one is marked by severe insulin resistance, and it's accompanied by elevated insulin release, often 150 to 250% of normal. These patients have a higher BMI because of that higher circulating insulin. Remember, insulin is a storage hormone, and increased insulin leads to more fat storage. The abnormal blood sugars in these patients come late as the pancreas can compensate for a long time. 15% of type 2 diabetics fall into this severe insulin resistance category. The fourth subtype we see is called weight-related insulin resistance. Here we see more moderate levels of insulin resistance accompanied by moderately increased insulin production, usually 100 to 150% of normal. These patients are often diagnosed with diabetes earlier, around 45 to 55 years of age, and they have an excellent response to weight loss. This subtype represents 22% of type 2 diabetics. The fifth and final subtype we see is called age-related insulin resistance. It is the most common subtype, with 39% of diabetics falling into this category. Here we see moderate insulin resistance accompanied by minimal pancreatic beta cell compensation. These patients present later, 65 years and onwards, hence the name age-related, and this subtype is very responsive to weight loss and exercise. If we look at this across the 5 different subtypes, 2 of the subtypes are insulin deficient, and 3 are insulin resistant. Where insulin resistance is dominant, evidence suggests that remission is possible. While 75% of patients fall into the insulin-resistant subtypes, our data shows that 91% of patients have significant insulin resistance, that if reversed would allow their diabetes to go into remission. The 4+2 strategy, with our 12-week behavior change curriculum, focuses on decreasing the insulin resistance caused by hepatic fat. So this is why we see such a high rate of improvement in our program. But when we look at these different subtypes, there's a special opportunity to personalize the approach. With subtype 1, the first thing that we have to address is any insulin resistance that's present, as this will only worsen blood sugar control. Because these patients have decreased carbohydrate tolerance, continuous glucose monitors are essential to help them understand which carbs will spike their blood sugars. Exercise is important, and especially after eating, can help control blood sugars. Muscle movement allows for glucose absorption without the requirement of insulin, and this can be very impactful. Increasing muscle mass can also improve glycemic control. Finally, anything that dampens inflammation may slow the autoimmune process that will be helpful for this subtype. For subtype 2, it's similar to subtype 1. Any insulin or insulin resistant must be addressed. CGM again is essential so that these patients can understand what carbohydrates they can or cannot eat. Exercise, especially after eating, is going to make a difference, and again we want to increase their muscle mass. For severe insulin resistance, the third subtype, it may be difficult to get weight loss started due to the high level of insulin. After improving nutrition quality, we may need a GLP-1 to get weight loss started. Glucose levels tend to normalize relatively quickly, but it takes a lot longer to resolve insulin resistance. In subtype 4, weight-related insulin resistance, these patients are very responsive to lifestyle changes. Hemoglobin A1C will improve as weight loss improves insulin resistance. And once below the personal fat threshold, they may continue to improve even if weight is plateaued. Finally, in age-related insulin resistance, these patients also improve with weight loss. Muscle insulin resistance likely plays a larger role in this subtype, so exercise plays a key role. Increasing muscle mass and improving muscle health will help. Weight loss improves insulin resistance, but we need to ensure that the weight loss is not at the expense of muscle mass loss. So the bottom line here is that most people will improve by reversing insulin resistance, and individual variability is still significant even within these subtypes. But this offers us a glimpse at a personalized medicine approach for type 2 diabetes.
Okay, great. So as always, if you're listening to the audio version, you want to watch the video with the graphics and everything, take a look in the show notes, and there'll be a link there to if you want to watch that video or just skim through it and see the graphics. You can do that by the link in the notes. So anyhow, that was quite fascinating, that video. So I guess maybe want to explain a little bit how we incorporate all of that we learned about in there into the Lifestyle RX program the way it is today.
Yeah, so the basis for subtyping really comes on measuring the various components that that go into type 2 diabetes. So I always like to say that you can think of type 2 diabetes as this balance between how much insulin your pancreas can produce and how much resistance that insulin faces. And so Right now, what we do in your reports, we actually show you this. We'll show you kind of the beta percentage that you're at, and we'll show you the degree of insulin resistance. We don't use kind of age or other factors to necessarily subtype, but if you're insulin deficient, we generally do check for the antibodies. So we usually kind of, if you're in one of the insulin deficiency categories, we usually do chase down that diagnosis and kind of find out which one you are. In the other three insulin resistant categories, we don't we don't necessarily call it out at this stage, but your physician is starting to look at your behaviors and prioritizing behaviors kind of within that's going to fit with the subtype. So it's a bit of a work in progress, and we're trying to figure out whether it adds value to call out the subtype. And at this stage, I'm not sure that it does. I think at the practitioner level, for the practitioner to kind of be aware, of what works for different subtypes, that's where we are. Part of it is also that we're probably ahead of a lot of clinical organizations in terms of even thinking about this, right? So many, most people in our program never had their HOMA IR2 done. So they never have ever known how insulin resistant they are or what their pancreas is doing. So I think, we've got to learn a little bit how to use it best and understand it. But the practitioners have, even prior to kind of, calling out these subtypes, our practitioners have actually been pretty good in terms of knowing, when you have high insulin resistance, what are going to be the issues, or if you have kind of low pancreas function, what's going to be the issue.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess that's kind of why the current reports don't actually give you those custom reports you get for each patient they go through our program don't actually tell you your subtype, right?
Yeah. So yeah, we don't explicitly tell you your subtype. As I said, we will end up diagnosing the first two because in order to diagnose the first one, we actually have to do an antibody test, and so if in order to figure out what's going on, we generally go down that path. But the report itself doesn't lead to that at this stage. And I think that really kind of what we're relying on is even within those subtypes, I think the differences between people are probably more important. And so I think what I don't want to have is that we think that because it's a subtype, here's the formula for this subtype. It still is the general strategy. And then really what you have to do is kind of look at what your current behaviors are, kind of and what's happening with your physiology, and land on kind of what the next most important thing for you to do is. And I think that's right now, I think that's probably best left to a discussion between your practitioner and yourself in those one-on-one sessions. But we'll see. I think over time, as we start to go down this path, we'll learn kind of what components do we want to call attention to. What's interesting is as we start to do this, and I think a lot of people will recognize that in the case studies that we've gone through, we've actually gone through all the subtypes, right? So we kind of gave a hint that we were going this direction because we did all these case studies that were all one of each different subtype. I've had many people come to me and say, "I think I'm this subtype. Am I right?" And it's actually thrilling for me because patients are understanding the physiology and they're actually nailing it. And they're realizing, oh yeah, I've got severe insulin resistance. I've got that super pancreas that's producing a ton of insulin. I get why, I get why, I'm perhaps heavier than some of the other people in other subtypes. And I get why losing weight may be harder for me to get started than somebody else. And so people are actually identifying from these groups. This will give a little bit more background to that. But at the end of the day, we don't really want you to identify with a subtype. We want you just to kind of learn about yourself, understand yourself, and then take the next step on your own path, rather than thinking about it as being that there's necessarily a formula for a particular subtype.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah, and like you mentioned, the case studies that we've done in the past episodes have gone through one subtype at a time, basically. So if you want to look back on those and watch them, you can you can learn about each different subtype and see an actual case of a patient that had that particular one.
Yeah, and I think what we should do in the community is when we publish this, Dan, let's put the subtype video kind of in the community, and let's put the 5 case studies underneath it, so there's kind of one place for all of these things.
Yeah.
And then what I encourage kind of our listeners to do is think about this and think what questions they have, after considering that, hey, there's I thought it was just diabetes, type 2. Now you're saying there's subtypes of type 2 diabetes. This is getting confusing. It'd be interesting to see what questions people have afterwards, and we can tackle those in future episodes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and as always, if you have a question or anything, leave it on the comments on YouTube or Spotify or in the community, and we look through those all and we'll answer them. So, okay, anything else regarding subtypes before we move on past that?
No, I think the video really kind of crystallizes the concept well, and we'll look forward to the questions following.
Sounds good. Okay, so going on to our question of the week for this week. So this person says they've been doing up to a 16-hour fast every day, and they absolutely love it. And they're wondering if they should expand into doing a 24-hour or even a 48-hour fast.
Okay,
What are our
yeah.
thoughts on that?
So this is a common question, and I think it comes from 2 directions. One is there's a heck of a lot of stuff around fasting on the internet, and it's become a very popular thing to do. And so that's one thing. The other thing, and I think that's kind of really genuine, is that people, once they build up to a 16-hour fast, a lot of people really enjoy the fasting because they're not hungry. They'll often tell me that they believe their thinking is more clear in the morning during that fasting period, and they don't have to think about breakfast. So it's kind of this win. They feel good, and it's one less meal to worry about. So with fasting, we use it from the standpoint of, first and foremost, it flips the metabolic switch during that first 12 hours. It gets you into fat burning mode. We extend the fast to spend a little bit more time in that fat burning zone, and that's helpful in terms of burning off the fat that we need to reverse insulin resistance. What I worry about, and I say this one over and over and over again, is when we eat for energy, but we also eat for growth and repair. And so not eating, yet we can rely on our energy stores, but we don't have protein stores. We don't store protein, right? So we store, the energy from our food, but we don't store the actual protein. And so if you're fasting longer than 16 hours, you're going to break down some muscle in order to kind of make up for the lack of protein coming in, and that those muscles get broken down, and the amino acids will get repurposed. So by and large, what I will tell people is that I don't want them going past 16 hours. Now, if they occasionally did a 24 or 48 hour fast once a month because they felt good and they felt it was helpful, that frequency is probably not going to be all that harmful, but they probably still are going to lose some muscle mass. And the muscles are such an important part of metabolic health, right? They're our metabolic engine. And for most people with type 2 diabetes, the muscles are not perfectly healthy right now, right? And so losing muscle mass is really going to take us in the wrong direction. And so, I kind of encourage people to think about it as kind of an overnight fast, take it to 16 hours, and then focus on getting the protein in during that 8-hour eating window. And those benefits that you're worried about, thinking that you might get from those prolonged fasts, and people who are very knowledgeable on this will be, but Brendan, what about autophagy? That cellular cleanup that occurs, and all the benefits of that. Wouldn't that outweigh kind of the loss of muscle mass? And I think that let's get the metabolic health reestablished first. And I think when somebody's fully metabolically healthy, then you could do a 24-hour fast once a month at that sort of frequency. You could do a longer fast than 24 hours, maybe once a quarter, to try and trigger that autophagy. But now when we're kind of on this path, really trying to restore metabolic health, let's not do that, right? Let's really focus on getting enough protein in when we eat, building our muscles by exercising and using them, and get that muscle health back. And we can kind of, we can revisit those longer fasts in the future.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So that's our episode for this week. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back again next week with another episode. And as always, if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments. If you know anyone else that would benefit from this podcast, share it with them, send them the links. And if you'd like to join the Lifestyle RX program, it's available and it's provincially covered in Alberta, BC, and Ontario. And you can sign up at lifestylерx.ca now. So, thank you so much, Brendan, for your time today. And we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Nat.
Bye.